want to start today by reading what I think is a very well-known psalm, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. You know, that really is such a good psalm. It's one of those psalms that, or one of those passages of scripture, I guess I should say, that when I was a kid, I had to memorize. I remember Sunday school class, you memorized that psalm and then you got a gold star for your particular day that you were able to recite the whole thing. And I do, I know it by heart. And I know a lot of you probably do as well, or many of you do anyway. Some of you probably like the King James Version with all the runneths and the thouists and all these other things that are in there. And I understand that. In fact, that was the way I first learned it. But you know, there was something else about it when I first learned it that always stuck out to me until I finally had a Sunday school teacher explain to me. It was right there from that first line, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I remember as a kid reading that and thinking to myself, well, if the Lord is my shepherd, why don't I want him? I couldn't figure out what is this I shall not want, my shepherd. I mean, it did not make any sense to me. And then someone said to me, oh, no, Scott, what you've got to hear there is they're talking about how because God is your shepherd, God takes away all of your other wants, those things that you want, you know about the things you want. And so they explained it to me and I thought, all right, that makes more sense, but I wonder why they didn't just write it that way. Well, anyway, as I thought about that, you know, and I thought about this process that I go through whenever I'm trying to write a sermon or something like that, oftentimes when I'm writing a sermon, I'm reflecting on my experience of God, and I started to wonder to myself, I wonder if that wasn't what was going on for King David. I mean, a lot of folks say that this is a psalm that King David wrote, and he was able to put into words his experience of the presence with God. And so I was thinking about that as I read this devotional online, and I was really struck by the way in which this particular author talked about this psalm. She said, I love this psalm, but sometimes we do want. We want different things. We want to feel better. We want to be healed. We want a relationship fixed. We want the results. We want the answer. We want the relief. And we often feel like these are not simply wants, but they're needs. She was kind of asking, what do we do when we find ourselves in want? And again, I love the honesty of that question. But again, as I thought about this process of which David was writing, I recognized that perhaps this was a psalm that David was able to write more in his latter years of life. In other words, if you look at David and his experience of life earlier, some of the stories that we find about David in 1st and 2nd Samuel and Chronicles, those books of the Bible that talk about David, what we see is someone who had a tremendous amount of want. I mean, there were a lot of things he wanted. He wanted victory over his enemies. He wanted relationship, one time a relationship with someone he shouldn't have been in relationship with. And I really think that perhaps in writing this psalm, David may have been reflecting on the way in which his journey with God has taken away some of those wants, because he is beginning to, in this moment of his life, be able to fill it with the presence of God. And his wants have actually changed. In fact, as I looked at the psalm even closer, I realized that some of that language is even in the psalm itself. In verse 2, it says, He makes me lie down in green pastures. He doesn't invite me to lie down in green pastures. He doesn't suggest that I lie down in green pastures. He absolutely makes me. Why? Because I'm going so fast. I want so many things out of my life that I needed God to force me into places of rest. It's throughout this psalm. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths. In other words, he leads me because I don't necessarily want to go that direction. I need someone to say, no, come this way. So do you hear it even in the language of this psalm itself? David is realizing that God is changing his wants. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, or in the valley of darkness, as it says in this version, I'll fear no evil. I don't want to go down no valley of death. I don't want to face those dark times in my life. But even though I am, I'm realizing that God is there to care for me in the midst of my fear. How about this one? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Who would in their right mind want to sit at the table with their enemies? And yet, for David, God is molding him, changing his wants. He starts off with this wonderful line, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And that's been something I've learned is really what David should have tagged on. But maybe that's what he's doing through the rest of the psalm. So perhaps this week, take time to sit down with that psalm, to read it through, to hit that first verse, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, or he takes away all my wants, and then begin to imagine those things that we want and how God is trying to satisfy those wants and change them so that we find ourselves at peace, perhaps like the author David of Psalm 23 learned along the way.